The moment they said the words out loud, I felt it in my chest before I felt it anywhere else. A slow, hollow drop, like missing a step in the dark. She's not blood. She doesn't belong in this room. My uncle said it the way people say things they've practiced. Like he'd been waiting for exactly this moment, for exactly this audience. There were 32 people in that conference room. I counted them later, in the elevator, because I needed something to do with my hands besides shake. 32 people, and not one of them said a word. I was 31 years old. I had a master's degree in education framed on my apartment wall. I had my grandfather's eyes, everyone always said so, even the people who knew I was adopted. And I sat there in that leather chair while my uncle told the room I didn't belong in it. And I said, okay, just that. Just okay. My name is Claire. And this is the story of what happened when my grandfather's attorney walked into that room 18 minutes later with a manila envelope my family didn't know existed. I need to go back a little, because none of this makes sense without the before. My grandfather's name was Walter Aldridge. He built a regional logistics company called Aldridge Transport out of a single truck and 30 years of 5A. Mornings. By the time I was born, not born into the family, placed into it, at age 4, through the foster system, he had 400 employees, a fleet of vehicles spanning 3 states, and a habit of drinking his coffee on the back porch every morning while the rest of the house slept. That porch is where I got to know him. My adoptive parents, his son Richard and Richard's wife Pamela, weren't unkind exactly. That's the word I always struggle with when people ask. They weren't cruel. They just had 2 biological children, my brother Marcus, who was 3 years older than me, and my sister Diane, who was 2 years younger, and those 2 children fit neatly into the life Richard and Pamela had already built. I was the addition they'd decided to make for reasons they never fully explained to me. A choice they made and then seemed mildly surprised by. The way you're surprised when you rearrange the furniture and realize the room doesn't quite feel right anymore. Grandpa Walter was different. He never treated my adoption as a footnote. He'd introduce me to his colleagues as my granddaughter Claire, with the same uncomplicated pride he used for Marcus and Diane, and if anyone raised an eyebrow, his expression would go very still in a way that made them decide not to pursue it. He taught me to fish at the cabin in Vermont. He came to every one of my school concerts, even the ones my parents missed. When I was 16 and I told him I was scared, I didn't really belong anywhere, not with my birth family, who I'd never found, and not entirely with the Aldridges either. He put his coffee cup down on the porch railing and looked at me for a long time. Belonging isn't something that happens to you, he said. It's something that gets built. You and I have been building it since you were 4 years old. Nobody gets to knock that down. I didn't fully understand what he meant until 2 years ago, when he was diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer. He didn't tell most of the family right away. He told me first. He called me on a Tuesday evening while I was grading papers at my kitchen table, and his voice was the same as always, steady, a little gravelly, like a man who had spent decades getting up before the sun, and he said, "Claire, I need to tell you something, and I need you not to make a fuss." I made a fuss, quietly, after we hung up. But while we were talking, I held it together, because that's what he was asking me to do. Over the next several months, as he went through treatment, I drove to his house in Millbrook every weekend I could manage. My parents were there too, of course, and Marcus and Diane came when they could, but there was a shift in the house during those months that I felt but couldn't name. Conversations that stopped when I walked into the kitchen, my father and Marcus spending long hours in Grandpa's study with the door closed, my mother being unusually warm to me in that deliberate, slightly effortful way that meant she was managing something. I asked Grandpa about it once, sitting with him on that same back porch, in October, with the Vermont trees going gold and orange around us. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "With the family. There's something I don't know. Something feels off." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the tree line the way he always did when he was deciding how much to say. "Everything is exactly as it should be," he said finally. "I've taken care of things." "What does that mean?" He turned and looked at me with that same steady expression, the one that had always made me feel like solid ground. "It means you don't need to worry. It means when the time comes, you'll know what to do." He died in March, quietly, in the house he'd lived in for 40 years. On a Thursday morning before most of the family had arrived. I was there. I was holding his hand. I didn't cry at the funeral. I think I was still somewhere before crying, In that gray, still space where grief hasn't become real yet and you move through the world like you're watching yourself on a slight delay. My father gave the eulogy. It was good he'd loved his father. I believe that, and the words were true even if they landed somewhere hollow in me, in the place where the real Walter Aldridge lived, and where no eulogy was ever going to be adequate. Afterward, there was the reading of the will. Richard had arranged it for the following week. Not at the house, he'd booked the conference room at Aldridge Transport's main office, which I thought was a strange choice until I realized that it wasn't a strange choice at all. It was a deliberate one. The company offices were Richard's territory. He'd been running day-to-day operations for 6 years. The space sent a message, and the message was, "This is already mine." I wore a gray blazer I'd bought specifically for the occasion. I don't know why that detail has stayed with me. Maybe because getting dressed that morning felt like the last normal thing I did before everything changed. The conference room was full by the time I arrived. Aldridge family, company executives, a few longtime family friends. 32 people, arranged around a long oval table and along the walls, the way people arrange themselves when they know something significant is about to happen. I found a seat midway down the table, between a second cousin I barely knew and an empty chair. My father was at the head of the table, not where the attorney would sit, but adjacent to it, which was its own kind of statement. Marcus was beside him. Diane was across from me, and she gave me a small smile that I've thought about many times since. The attorney who walked in was not the one I expected. I had met my grandfather's longtime attorney once, briefly, at a company event. His name was Harold Fenn, a slight man in his 70s with a careful way of speaking. The person who walked in was not Harold Fenn. He was younger, maybe 50, with a compact, economical way of moving, and a briefcase that he set on the table with the unhurried confidence of someone who had done this many times and was not anxious about it. "Good afternoon," he said. "My name is Daniel Brewster. I'm the attorney of record for the estate of Walter James Aldridge." My father's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind it. "We were expecting Harold," he said. "Fenn retired 18 months ago," Brewster said pleasantly. "I've been handling Mr. Aldridge's affairs since then. With the family's indulgence, I'd like to proceed." He opened the briefcase. "What happened next, I want to be careful about, because the sequence matters." Brewster began reading. The language was the language of wills, formal, precise, a little airless. There were provisions for longtime employees. A donation to the local library where my grandfather had spent many Saturday mornings. Personal items distributed to various family members. My father received a meaningful percentage of the company shares. Marcus received a smaller percentage. These readings were met with the particular silence of people who are pleased but performing restraint. Then my uncle, not my father, but my father's brother, my Uncle Gerald, who'd flown in from Atlanta and who I had never been particularly close to, leaned forward. "Before we continue," he said, "I think we should clarify who is appropriately represented here." He glanced at me with the precise neutrality of someone who has decided that neutrality is the most cutting available option. "There are some of us who feel that the presence of non-family members at a private family proceeding—" "I'm his granddaughter," I said. I surprised myself. I hadn't planned to speak. The words just came out, clean and level, before the hesitating part of me could catch up. Gerald's expression shifted slightly. "You're adopted, Claire. You were never legally—" "She was legally adopted," Diane said from across the table. Her voice was quiet but very clear. "That's what adoption means, Gerald." Gerald looked at my father, who looked at the table. "She's not blood," Gerald said. The words landed in the room like something dropped. "She doesn't belong in this proceeding. It's a private family matter." 32 people. Not one voice. I felt my face go very still. I've learned, over the years, to do that, to take whatever is happening to my face and flatten it, because showing people they've landed a blow is the same as handing them something. I thought about standing up. I thought about the 16 things I could say. Some of them calm and some of them not. I thought about my grandfather's voice on that back porch. Nobody gets to knock that down. And then I thought about something else. A small, quiet thought that had been sitting in the back of my mind since October, since my grandfather had looked at the tree line and said, "I've taken care of things." "If she makes you uncomfortable," my father said, and his voice had the particular smoothness of a man performing a version of fairness, "perhaps she could wait outside while we—" "I'll stay," I said. "Claire." His voice dropped half a register. the way it used to when I was a teenager and he was reminding me of the order of things. I think it would be easier. I said I'll stay. The room was very quiet. Brewster looked up from his papers. He looked at me, then at Gerald, then at my father. His expression gave nothing away. With respect, he said, the question of who has standing in this proceeding is not a matter for the room to decide. Shall we continue? Gerald settled back in his chair. My father said nothing. I put my hands flat on the table and kept them still. Brewster continued reading. He got to the section on Aldridge Transport, the company shares, the operational structure, the succession arrangements my father had clearly anticipated and had clearly been working toward for years. Richard would assume full operational control. Marcus would serve on the board. The existing management team would be retained. It was orderly. It was, in its way, complete. And then Brewster paused. He set down the document he'd been reading and reached into his briefcase. He removed a separate envelope, cream-colored, heavier than standard paper, and set it on the table in front of him with the same unhurried deliberateness with which he'd set down the briefcase. There is an additional instrument, he said, which was executed separately and which supersedes the relevant sections of the primary document. This is an irrevocable family trust, established 7 years ago, with amendments finalized 14 months ago. My father sat very still. 7 years ago, Gerald said. Walter never mentioned. He wasn't required to.